Hello, I'm Tracy Grimshaw. Welcome to A Current Affair. A 10-year battle for justice has finally ended for the family of Daniel Morcombe, with today's guilty verdict against Brett Peter Cowan. Reporter Chris Allen joins us live. And Chris, now the trial is over, there is predictable anger at Cowan's history of sexual offences against children and relatively light sentences.
That's right, Tracy, and I think that anger is only going to get louder in the next few days as more people digest what we've learnt about Brett Peter Cowan. Child protection groups are already asking how it was possible this man was ever allowed back on the streets after crimes he committed 20 years ago. Indeed, 20 years ago, Cowan himself told arresting officers that he needed help. And when you see our story, you'll understand why he was saying that. It is the face of evil, Brett Peter Cowan. His shocking and depraved history started long before Daniel Morcombe. At the 2011 inquest into Daniel's disappearance, Cowan admitted that he'd been abusing children since he was 9 or 10 himself. By the time he was 18, he estimated he'd preyed on as many as 30 children. And while most of those encounters were fleeting, that was all about to change. In 1987, Cowan took a 7-year-old into a public toilet in Brisbane and molested him. After 2 years on the run, Cowan was sentenced to 2 years for that assault. In 1993, Cowan attacked again, this time in the Northern Territory, kidnapping, assaulting and indecently dealing with a 6-year-old boy.
The 24-year-old man was arrested late yesterday in relation to the bashing of the 6-year-old boy.
He then dumped the defenceless youngster whose injuries were so bad he required treatment in intensive care.
He was taken to Royal Darwin Hospital and placed in intensive care, treated for a collapsed and punctured lung, black eyes and deep cuts and scratches.
Cowan told officers then he needed help. He pleaded guilty and got 7 years jail. He was not long out of jail on that offence when he moved to the Sunshine Coast, where he became a suspect when Daniel disappeared in 2003. But it was to take 8 years to catch him.
I'm told you've done the Daniel Morcombe murder.
This was the confession police worked months to get.
So what do I need to fix?
Yeah, okay. No. Yeah, I do.
All right, so you did it.
Cowan thought he was talking to a gang leader. In fact, he was talking to an undercover cop.
I didn't talk to him at all when I got there. Maybe just look as though I was waiting for the bus.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
The bus drove past, and that's when I said, I'm going down to the shopping centre, do you want a lift?
Yep.
And he's gone, yep.
This elaborate sting had been months in the planning. Firstly, an undercover cop befriends Cowan on a plane flight to Perth and then introduces him to his criminal mates, who are also undercover cops. Finally, they tell Cowan they've got a drug deal going down, which will be worth $100,000 to him. But first, he has to meet their boss, a man called Arnold.
So you taken him to the house?
Yep.
What happened in the house? Like I said, I'm not judging you, right?
Yeah, well, I never got to molest him or anything like that. He panicked and I panicked and grabbed him around the throat, and before I knew it, he was dead.
All right, so you've choked him out? Yeah. He's died? Yeah. In that room?
Yeah.
What have you done then with him?
Taken him outside, and took his, put him in the back of my car.
More than anything, it was this vision of Brett Peter Cowan leading undercover cops to where he dumped Daniel's body that convinced police he was the killer, police arresting him at the scene. At the time, Cowan was married with a young son. His former wife Tracy told the jury on that day her husband left home to pick up a mulcher.
Around about 1-ish, then late afternoon I heard the mulcher, around about 2:40, 3 o'clock.
In that time, police say Cowan abducted and murdered Daniel. The former churchgoer was always a suspect, but it wasn't until police pulled off this elaborate sting that they got proof.
Okay, so once you've done that, what have you done with him then?
Took him out of the car,
yep.
Dragged him down the embankment and...
When you dragged him, did you leave anything... How'd you drag him? By the feet, by the... arms or?
Then I carried him over and threw him down the embankment and he sort of...
Okay, so you threw him over the embankment?
Yeah.
How far was that?
Metre and a half.
Believing his criminal mates were going to help him cover up the crime, Cowan took them to where he says he dumped Daniel's body and his clothes.
I've stripped him off.
Yep.
And trees and all that sort of stuff, and branches, and covered his body with that. His clothes I took back with me and threw them into the creek.
And what happened to him? Oh, right, so
Sank and floated away.
it sank and floated away.
Yeah. None of that's ever been found.
Well, you're lucky, aren't you?
Yeah.
Cowan says he didn't plan to abduct Daniel, it just happened.
I didn't go out that day to molest the kid or anything like that.
What happened?
Yeah.
Not long after Daniel's murder, Cowan separated from his wife, who was then pregnant with their second son. He ended up living in Perth, which is where police carried out the elaborate undercover operation which saw him charged with Daniel's murder. Today outside court, rather than take all the credit, Assistant Commissioner Mike Condon thanked Bruce and Denise Morcombe.
I'd like to thank the Morcombe family for their patience, their belief and ongoing belief in the investigators, and our thoughts are with them right at this moment.
And finally, the Morcombes left court after more than a decade of fighting to find out what happened to Daniel.
Compelling evidence has found beyond reasonable doubt Mr. Cowan's guilt.
On behalf of our entire family, we would like to thank everybody for assisting us in the search for Daniel.
Chris, how was the verdict received in court today?
Well, it was a very emotional result, as you can imagine. The Morcombes have been waiting for more than a decade for this. Mrs. Morcombe was overcome, broke down into tears. She was reaching out to touch her husband, who was sitting beside her, and her two sons, handing out tissues. From the back of the courtroom, I heard someone saying yes in one of those kind of gotcha moments. I'm not sure whether it was a member of the family or just a supporter, but there seemed to be an overwhelming sense of relief follow that finally it was over.
They really have been so strong and so focused, haven't they? The Morcombes all made some pretty powerful victim impact statements today.
They did indeed, yes. Bruce Morcombe, for the first time ever, stood up and read his own statement, and he addressed Cowan, who I must say seemed to ignore him for the most part. But he said it made him nauseous to be in the same room as Cowan. He said that they were no longer the same people, any of them. He detailed how they'd had to sell their house, he'd had to give up his job and could no longer go back to the same form of employment. He also added that Cowan had picked the wrong family because they were all determined and united to find out who had done this. And he finished up by calling him a perverted, cold-blooded, child-killing paedophile. After that, there was a round of applause. Then Mrs. Morcombe's victim impact statement was actually read by the prosecutor on her behalf. In it, she said and detailed that she hadn't been able to sleep more than about 3 hours at any time since this had happened. And she gave a very sad image of her constantly remembering or thinking of her son lying in a dark, eerie bushland being devoured by animals. And she finished off by describing him as an evil, evil, unhuman thing. Daniel's twin brother Bradley also had his speech read out for him, and he pointed out that he'd missed many milestones along the way, that Daniel simply wasn't there for birthdays and so on. He pointed out that he was about to get married and Daniel should have been his best man and there to share a beer with him, but of course won't be.
It's powerful imagery from this family. What is the maximum sentence that Cowan can receive, Chris?
I understand it will be a mandatory life sentence. Now, normally that can come with a parole period of 15 years. But in this case, the prosecution is asking for either no parole whatsoever or at least a minimum of 20 years. So we'll just have to wait and see which way the judge goes on that one.
And when will he be sentenced? Because there was some conjecture about that today, I think.
Yes, we're not quite sure whether it will be tomorrow, there's a possibility, or whether it will be early next week. I gather the judge is considering her options overnight, and we'll know tomorrow whether the final sentencing will be dealt then or whether it will be early next week. So at this stage, we're not sure.
All right, thanks, Chris. We'll leave it there. Chris Allen. And our thoughts are with Daniel's family tonight. They have fought so hard for this verdict.